Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 213.
I realize that we're born different heights, we're born different everything, and intelligence is also different, I think. We're not all equal in that regard. However, curiosity can be that great equalizer.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Matt Murrie. Matt Murrie is the Chief Curiosity Curator of What If 360 and author of the book of What If. As designer of What If 360 curiosity-based learning and innovation process, Matt facilitates experiences that connect curiosity with action that leads to innovation. He is a former English professor and social entrepreneurship professor and coordinator of innovation at Churchill Institute for Global Engagement at Westminster College. A graduate of Columbia University's Teacher College, he has over a decade of teaching experience in 5 countries on 3 different continents as a public school teacher, Peace Corps volunteer, and college professor. He believes curiosity is a natural resource that can be converted into energy powerful enough to not only power our planet, but to guide it. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about your message. You know, he's got a great TEDx talk that I looked at and perused his book a little bit. But before we get into any of that, you know, about your message, please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I guess to start about myself is I'm just a super curious person. And I'm starting to learn just to start with that, because pretty much anything else I could say about myself, I've come to realize over time, has all really come from and as a result of just a crazy nonstop curiosity, right? Everything that I do from the, I guess I was going to say career in air quotes, but the thing, because I don't know if I have a single career, right? But anything, you know, the way I spend my time, whether it's professionally or personally, it really just all comes from curiosity, you know, and asking this question, well, what if I do this? Or what if this could be different? So everything, you know, from majoring, you know, in English as a young, you know, as a younger person than I am now, to going into the Peace Corps, to then going on to becoming, you know, to start writing, going into social entrepreneurship, and now the work that I do around the world. Really, every step along the way was just asking, you know, what if? And in more ways than not, like, what if things could be better? You know, not just different or new, but what if we could really make changes that affected people's lives and the planet in positive ways?
That's awesome. Well, I kind of want to hear the background story, you know, of like, take us through, you know, your degree as an English student, you know, through all of that with Peace Corps, and then how that's helped evolve your message. You know, I want to know the inspiration behind that message.
Certainly. And it's funny too, because I know, you know, a big part of your program is about how your paradigms have changed and how people evolved over time. And I laugh a lot because one of the most common questions is like, you know, where did what if start, or how did this start? And I laugh because I think every time I've been asked, I end up giving a different answer. And it's not because I'm being disingenuous. And it's just, one, I never, when I started doing a lot of this, for whatever reason, it never occurred to me to really dig deep into where it all started, right? So, well, I'm smiling because I think one way I've evolved over time is just really tracking backwards, like, where did all of this begin? Because my initial response was always when I saw my first TED Talk. Yeah. And the first TED Talk I saw was really only about 5 years ago. And we started what was then called the What If Conference. And we still do this, but it's kind of where a lot of What If became official, let's say. The What If Conference was in a lot of ways just a response to TED Talks. Not an either or, you know, like a TED Talks are bad and we want to do something better. Just watching TED Talks and realizing that as an educator personally, I was always focused on student-centered learning and collaborative actions, and was really found it interesting that TED Talks would communicate some of the biggest, most innovative ideas on the planet Yet the mode in which they were being communicated was one of the most archaic forms. A sage on the stage, lecturing to a passive audience, reinforcing these ideas of and as kind of the quote unquote famous person, and then we're just here to listen and do whatever she says. And it kind of bothered me, right? So we came up with a way to limit let's say the spotlight of the speakers and shine it more on the collaborative actions of the entire crowd. So instead of giving just regular lectures about what somebody accomplished or what they know, we found questionnaires to ask what if questions related to things that either weren't answered or haven't been answered yet, as a way to, again, not tell people what they know, but to plant seeds so that they can collaborate together to drive actions. So then the whole system of these thought, conferences, let's say, changed from a small group of people telling others something to entire crowds of people working together through designed processes to collaborate curiosity, so that everybody left an event feeling like they were on the stage, that they contributed to the overall actions of the event. That's where my answer started. But then, I've been doing this for a while, and I realized, I started drilling down more into the curiosity aspect and the processes that I was designing to, bring all this about. And I realized that in many ways, it wasn't that first TED Talk that I saw. It was my time in the Peace Corps. Right out of college, I was a English major, so all the stereotypes apply, right? And I found, what am I going to do? I thought I was going to, either be a bartender or paint homes, because that's what most English majors I knew ended up doing. And I was in the Peace, and both my parents were public school teachers. So I intentionally majored in English literature instead of English education because I did not want to be a teacher. And nothing against the profession. I just saw my parents struggle their entire lives, not just financially. That was certainly, it was a big struggle growing up poor, but just seeing them struggle in a lot of ways professionally, just seeing what they wanted to accomplish and the constant limitations that administration and different, aspects beyond them kept putting onto them, and just seeing these people who are incredibly passionate about what they were doing and really just living their work, just to come home with that weight on them and not even have a financial, kind of side to say, all right, well, it's unfortunate or it's not good, but at least we've got this to make up for it. So I was really discouraged from being a teacher from an early age. But there I was in the Peace Corps. And next thing you know, I was in a high school, and they spun me around 3 times and pointed to a classroom and said, see you in 2 years. That's your class. That's kind of where this journey began with curiosity as a natural resource, or at least this idea of curiosity as a natural resource. Because the challenge in the Peace Corps wasn't necessarily just, how do we teach English? It's how do you teach English with no resources? I'd have a class where most of the students would have books. And this was in the late 90s, right? So most of the students had books, and a couple might have a computer at home. And then another class would have maybe half the students would have books, and then another class that, all the students from the villages who would ride donkeys to the town. And then, it's just, they have no running water, much less books. Right. Yeah. And it's in my job was the same, regardless of the class, is teach these lessons, accomplish these goals, no matter what. And it really forced me to look for or reimagine what a resource is. That you have no money, you have no books, we didn't have heat in the school oftentimes, and one of the things I started to pick up on was that curiosity that the students, especially, I should rephrase that, the curiosity in the students, no matter which class that they were in, right, mattered. So we would have students in the class who had the books and the traditional resources, and if they weren't curious, they would still struggle mightily in the class. But then you go on the other side and you see these students with absolutely no resources, and the students who just had that kind of glow in their eye of curiosity outperformed everybody.
Well, and I would imagine as a teacher, teaching the 2 different types of classes, I mean, one would be super inspiring and the other would be, oh man, let me help, hopefully I make it through this because it's great. Goes back to what your parents might have experienced.
No, exactly. Yeah, I always want to let people know that, sometimes they say, I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I work with kids, I'm an educator, but, at the end of the day, I still am selfish. I still have, things that I want and everything else and feelings and emotions and everything else. And you're spot on. And the worst thing is like, how do you manage those emotions when you go into a class or students just through the roof, excited, and then you turn on a dime and it's like, oh, and you're like, no, I can't be ugh and yay at the same time. It's the same job. Yeah. So you're exactly right. And I think one of those things that feeling, I try to let my emotions and, experiences drive positive actions or change in myself. Right. So how do we, instead of just having that same feeling every day, how do we fix it? And I think that's where we start looking at not just, I put the responsibility on myself. So instead of saying, hey, these students who are curious are awesome, let me focus on them and ignore the others, the goal then became, all right, if this curiosity is what the trick is, my role then as an educator should be to facilitate this or encourage, bring this out in everybody. So then my responsibility I took upon myself as to how can I create lessons, activities, engagements to spark this curiosity in all of my students instead of just saying, oh, this one's that, And that's part of the essence of treating curiosity as a natural resource is my approach to it is everybody has it, right? Or is capable of it, where things like, intelligence or finances and some of these other things could be maybe a little more limited. And I say that lovingly. I don't consider myself a super intelligent person. I have a brother and sister both who are far more intelligent than I am. And I realize that we're not all born, we're born different heights, we're born different everything, and intelligence is also different, I think. We're not all equal in that regard. However, curiosity can be that great equalizer.
That's awesome. I never thought of that. That's so true.
Well, thanks. And again, this is still my exploration, so I'm open to being wrong about a lot of this. But I think if we just chase intelligence, it forces us to, relegate these kids and those kids, right? Or to try to chase something that may not be possible. Where if we look at curiosity, we can kind of all get there.
Yeah, and helping to inspire that. I really love how you've taken us down that road. I mean, even starting with the TED Talks, a lot of us find TED Talks extremely inspiring, but I just never really thought about it that, yeah, you're just a completely, you're just there passively listening to this person. But I wonder how much better those ideas that those people present on stage could be is if they were in an interactive situation. I mean, you would come away inspired as the presenter yourself, because you're like, wow, I got 10 more ideas. And I did listen to one of your classes. I can't even remember I found it because I found the TED Talk this morning. But as when we were connecting, I found one of your classes and it was super. I listened to it. I was doing some work and listening to it. And I was like, wow. And you could see the light in the eyes of the kids that got to participate in this. And maybe you can help direct me to where I saw this, on the interwebs somewhere. Anyway.
No, I'd have to definitely look it up. And I can also share with you, actually listening to you here, just something you brought up. It may be relevant as well as I'll never forget my first TED Talk, right? And I always want to make sure I say this clearly because there are some super fanatics with TED, right? I found this the hard way that sometimes if you say something that's I don't even want to say I'm not anti-TED. I'm very defensive now because when we started this, we found a lot of people TED is 100% perfect and can do no wrong. And any suggestion that, hey, let's do things differently, or there could be another way, even let's collaborate, there can be a lot of resistance. So I always want to make sure it's clear is I love TED. I love TED Talks. So now that I got that out of the way, the first TED Talk I ever watched was What If This Is Your Brain on Jazz? I want to say the name of it. The name is a little foggy in my head, but I'll never forget the talk. It was about a neuroscientist who was curious about, the brain, how the brain works, and whether or not the brain is as engaged or active during rote memorization tasks versus improv. So this neuroscientist doctor brought in a classical pianist and a freestyle hip hop artist and had them do their thing while having a CAT scan, and he could watch their brain activity. And, lo and behold, it turns out that their brain is just as engaged. It's just engaged in different ways. So the traditional thought of people who are improving or not, quote unquote, preparing, days ahead of time, that while they're improving, in a lot of ways, they're working just as hard and just as much as the person who is practicing. It's just a difference, it's a different part of the brain, and it's a different condensed amount of time, let's say, right? And he can get more into those details. I was fascinated by a different thought, though. My takeaway was, wow, how often is it that, because it's a beautiful idea, but how often is it that somebody has this kind of curious idea and access to a CAT scan machine, right? And I'm working with students, and the other part I should mention is, as after Peace Corps, working at the university, I was working mainly with international students. So kind of that Peace Corps experience really carried over, and I was always looking at this at the lens of my students and wondering, wow, this is so true. Like, how often are we just killing wonderful ideas that could truly change, humanity in the world, because the person with the idea doesn't have access to resources to explore that idea. And again, resources, everybody thinks just money, money, money. No, we're talking time. We're talking CAT scan machines. We can talk anything, right? So the kind of the goal was, let's create this kind of serendipity collider. Let's create events, experiences, so that the person with the CAT scan machine, but no real, world shaking idea, can interact with that person with that awesome idea, but no access to resources. So together they can collaborate to make this. And the kind of the philosophy was that we could really jumpstart innovation by bridging the gap between ideas and action.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of where the genesis started, 5 years ago. But if I could start the entire, so those are the two starting points I've been saying the last few, years. But just in this past year, I came to realize that, if I'm truly honest, this all started much earlier in my life, when I can't even give you a date. I'd say maybe 5 years old or 6 years old. My father and mother were both public school teachers. And when they had kids, my mother took time off to raise us. So we were single income on a single public school teacher salary in rural Missouri. And this isn't a woe is me story. It's just a reality. And my father, bless his heart, would work as many jobs over the summer as possible. And one of those happened to be a World Book encyclopedia salesman. We got free encyclopedias. So I'll never forget, this is way before the internet too, right? So, fun for me was just pulling out a random, book A through Z and opening it up to a random page and reading whatever my finger landed on. And whatever word, idea, person, or place caught my, curiosity, to pull that book out and look up that. And, it's kind of a caveman internet, I guess you could say. The hyperlinks were my fingers from book to book in the encyclopedia set. And, hours later, my mom would come in the room and just see a mess of books open, laying across the floor, and tell me I have to clean them up. So I think that, in a lot of ways, probably the earliest starting point. Yeah, just sitting on the floor in our living room, pulling out books, seeing where my curiosity could take me.
That's cool. I actually remember that too. And my kids did that. We had the internet. That's how I was teaching them. But I still bought a set of encyclopedias because, I'm from the old school. And so I would find my kids doing that all the time. They found that's really interesting. I still think that's really important. But so, I love this message of what if. I think we don't have enough people that ask the question. I mean, we just go through the humdrum part of life. And sometimes we get caught in just reliving what our parents did with us and those types of things, but we never really ask the questions, but why or what if, or, those types of things. What do you feel like are maybe some common struggles that you see with people, as you're working with them with these what if questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm stunned at how many people are maybe terrified's too strong of a word, or not strong enough, just to ask that question.
That's interesting.
And again, I've recently made the transition out of Missouri to the West Coast, so that things are getting better. But I faced the 8 years I lived in Missouri. I tell people, if I'm honest with you, you won't believe me. But the resistance that I found just asking people to come together to ask what if was, and I don't say this lightly, it became dangerous. Yeah. And I found the higher up, let's say the structure, that the person was, right. The more almost offended they were by the gall that somebody would propose asking what if, because I think especially in the middle of the country and in the middle of Missouri in particular, change is not something that is viewed upon positively. And again, these are cliches and stereotypes, and I try to live outside of those. And unfortunately, sometimes stereotypes exist for reasons. And so I think that was a huge challenge. And then personally, then I had a hard time dealing with that challenge, right? I'll say I probably failed because my focus was always on let's say the lower down that system, that structure, because the students, a lot of even the teachers and the educators were incredibly enthusiastic about asking what if. But the more we would push it and the more we would ask it, the more resistance we would find higher up. And that's something I can no longer fight that battle in Missouri anymore, but it's from Missouri. But I hope it's something I never stop fighting, because it's incredibly important. And the challenges to people asking what if are very real.
Yeah.
From personal experience.
I love that. That's a great answer. I think I see that in my own life here. Of course, we're kind of in the middle too. Idaho is.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, there's something there. There's a power struggle for sure. I feel like that's what you're saying is like the people that are controlling things don't really want us to ask what if, because then that may result with them not holding all the cards. Does that make sense? Like, and it's sad. It's sad in the 21st century, where we are now.
Yeah.
That's even a struggle, but the power struggle is definitely real. So for sure. So we on this podcast like to focus especially on self-educating, yourself or people who homeschool or unschool or those types of things. How do you feel like this message fits well with educating oneself?
Well, first I should also state out there, like, man, everybody in that space that you just mentioned, thank you. You are my idols. I am a huge fan, and any way I can continue connecting, supporting, working with, homeschooling, independent schooling, democratic education, unschooling. There's a lot of different groups like to label it differently, but to me, they're all just kind of non-traditional like approaches, right? You're fighting the good fight, let's say, right? I think, and I'm bringing this, maybe I should backtrack a little even more. I didn't have much exposure to that growing up, aside from a couple school, kids in the community I knew were homeschooled or for a while or that, but it was a very distant understanding. And a part of this journey, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was invited to speak at International Democratic Education Conference in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, cool.
And it was so eye-opening. And, I'll say, I tell people I'll do anything twice, I'll try anything twice. Like if you invite me to speak, I'm there, right? I'll do, I don't do a lot of judging, and I'm open to any kinds of whatever. So I went there with zero expectations and completely ignorant on what homeschooling was all about, right? And not only was I ignorant, if I were to be honest about what I thought it was, it would probably be insulting, let's say, and completely wrong.
Maybe
right?
A lot of stereotypes for sure.
Exactly. And I try to be very open about, where I've been wrong before. And
I don't think any homeschooler or unschooler listening is offended. It's like, it's a daily challenge.
Yeah. So I want to do what I can. I want to be an agent to help, change people's perspective, because it was really, if we really start breaking down, like, my evolution, I could not keep that out of the story, because I met some amazing people there. From Sugata Mitra was one of the speakers, right? To some people that I'm still in touch with now, who are running, like, it sounds kind of weird, but almost like massive homeschooling networks. They've gone beyond the home and they're actually forming communities of learners, right? And this is just so fascinating to me. So I was just thrown into the fire to speak, and it wasn't even speaking; it's really just learning, right? So I was asked to share what I do with What If and Curiosity, but I definitely learned more than I shared. And I was really impressed with just the overall approach to education and the willingness to step outside of this huge system of public education and make a difference. Yeah.
I'm starting to kind of like the term unschooling better, because even when I'm home, I'm running from one, and my kids aren't really, they might do some work here, but a lot of their work is done just in other places other than a school. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
I mean, when you homeschool or unschool, like you said, you're untethered from a school, but you are accessing a lot of classes from a lot of different places and a lot of different communities. You're just you're not structured in a school telling you what to do. So anyway,
and in fact, that's one of the things I get excited about is I share to people, like even, and so some of the people in the homeschooling community I found as being almost adversarial to the existing structures. So I'm cool. I'm fine. I'm not, your own thing. But I was really happy to find the ones who are looking for that Venn diagram side, right? I'm not trying to convince anybody to do one or the other, but I think one of the best ways to convince people isn't to necessarily say, all right, you have to go black or white. You're in public schools now and you have to jump automatically over to unschooling or, a homeschooling kind of way, right? I like to look at ways that we can take kind of best practices from what's happening into homeschooling and kind of insert that into the public schools, because I don't think it can change overnight. But if we can kind of take some of the best things that are going on outside of public schools and integrate them in, I think that might be the best way to kind of lead everybody to where the water is, right? Yeah. And one of the big things is kind of like what you're talking about is just, what if we looked at our communities as the classroom? Like decades from now, people are going to look back and go, wait a second, you're telling me these public schools had libraries inside the schools while there was a library inside of their town, and they were both, I mean, like this stuff is absurd. And there was probably a community college and something else. So like we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, for redundancies like this, right?
Replication. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just not efficient. But the other thing is, imagine like, how does your community change if students view, the world as their classroom, so that it's not just about learning. I'm a big, when I was getting after the Peace Corps, I went and got my master's in education. So now I'm officially an educator, right? But I was a big fan of Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, and, education, not just about learning, but just relationship building, right? And this idea of, how would everything change if when students look at their communities as their classroom, that, they're not just learning, but they're developing these relationships with the other people, their elders and their peers. So like, it's not just, you go to the bank and you can learn about math, but you're also developing an understanding and a personal relationship with the banker, right?
Wow, that is powerful.
And to me,
yeah.
It's powerful, but it's frustrating, right? Because why aren't we doing this? Yeah. So that's, I guess, one of the big things I learned about, from the homeschooling networks is that they're looking at communities as learning spaces, and how can we really accelerate that?
Yeah, I just recently, just one of my podcasts that went out was called Humility is the New Smart. And we talked a lot about relationships is going to become, or people who understand how to develop relationships are going to become very relevant in the future because of our smart machine age. They're going to have to know how to do those relationships. And like you said, I mean, we totally discount those interlaced ages as an opportunity for learning, and we segregate people. And in fact, like, one of my frustrations is when my children are out in the store, I actually have people coming up to me like, why aren't these kids in school? Where I'm going, like, they're totally learning in this environment. And a lot of people, like older people, sometimes love it because they want to feel like they're needed in the society, want to teach these kids. And so, so I get both directions of where their people are coming from, but let's use age to help us learn, let's intermix those ages. And anyway, awesome. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, not at all. You brought up a great point, though. Is like we are living in such an amazing time in human history. This is a whole nother podcast. We could just riff on that. But like with this technology that you just brought up, we're in this position where we should really have a more fluid approach to learning. Because there are certain things that age allows you, wisdom and to understand. Like we will always, like adults will always have information, knowledge, and experience that's valuable and really a responsibility to pass on to younger people.
Before we go on, please listen to this message. If you enjoy this content, you can help us with as little or as much as you'd like over at patreon.com/TheLuminousMind. These funds help us to continue to produce illuminating content with needed equipment and resources to spread the message of changing the educational paradigm. We appreciate all the ways our listeners help us continue this effort. We award them through patreon.com/The Luminous Mind by expanding exclusive content, giving away gifts, and giving patrons first seen products on patreon.com/The Luminous Mind. Check it out there.
What if? What if? I've got one simple question. What if? What if?
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Matt Murrie, who's helping us ask, what if? And then younger people can teach older people, like, specifically computer skills. A lot of, my 7-year-old.
You're in my brain. Yeah, keep going. You're in my brain. Keep going. Yeah.
Well, they can learn so much from each other, and I think that's, we have this hierarchy power of adults who think, you don't tell me what to do. You're 20 years younger than me, but there's so much that they could learn from each other if they just had a little bit of humility to recognize, that the old guy can learn something from the young guy, and the young guy, you know what I mean? Either way.
Yep.
So
no, exactly. You hit it right on the head. We've never had this gap in understanding of technology that we do today. And you said, you hit it perfectly. It opens these doors for legitimate, genuine education from the bottom up as well as the top down. And by doing that, going back to that idea of relationships, again, it's not about disrespecting our elders or anything else. But, if you look back in history, I think a lot of our, quote unquote, respect for elders came with the cost of a disrespect or devaluing of younger people, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And that hurts relationships. And again, that there's a long-term cumulative effect on relationships, because then what happens is, and I'm not a trained psychologist, so you're going to have to get someone else to, unpack this, but it does develop a difficult long-term relationship, generationally speaking. And I think that impacts society as a whole, because then people develop mistrust, right? You learn at a young age to maybe you shouldn't trust someone who's old. And then that goes on to everything from religion to governments to, bosses to everybody else. We learn how to nod our heads and then talk behind their back, right? Does that make sense? So if we can have this kind of more level of mutual respect and understanding cross-generationally, I think in the future we'll have, society will benefit. I can't even imagine how right now, but that's for the future to determine. But I think it would have long-term impacts that would be very positive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I feel bad. We've been talking for over a half an hour now, and I haven't even gotten into your website or your message. Before we get into that, though, do you think you can give us a quick idea of how you think your paradigm has changed over time and with experience? Going back from being a starting English student teacher to now. How do you feel like that's changed?
Yeah. It's an excellent question, and it's changed in so many ways. It's always difficult to nail it down to one, but I think in a lot of ways, I think it really has probably the biggest way it's changed is just constantly making it less about me as an individual, right? Always looking. I feel like I'm constantly evolving in ways to seek collaboration, to find sources of information and opportunities, not just from others, but with others, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if I could give a 30,000 foot view of the evolution, I think that's probably where it's been most, because even as a teacher way back when, after Peace Corps and then after getting my master's in education and getting back into the classroom, I was, again, air quotes here, taught to be student focused and to be student centered and prided myself and all that. But if I were to be honest with myself and to look at how I was teaching early on, as opposed to how I'm doing it now, it wasn't as student focused as it should have been, right? It wasn't, and not just student focused, but even colleague focused or community focused. Opening my ideas of again, going back to the homeschooling network, that that I should be reaching out and including and incorporating a much more comprehensive view of education, right? So I think that's probably if there's a single, idea or word, that would be the way I've evolved the most, is to truly align my actions with my philosophies and thoughts.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just read a study that talked about that the people who thought they were the most knowledgeable in a situation or whatever, and they're the ones talking and raising their hand, are actually the least knowledgeable. I think as time, that goes back to that experience, and with age, is that we realize that over time we aren't as smart as we think we are. Do you know what I mean? Like we know, we understand that there's a great community out there that we can collaborate with and learn from. And sometimes when we're first starting out, it's all about us, that we think we know everything, that we're all educated and all that. But that's how I feel with this podcast, for sure. Anyway, it's definitely more,
I think anything
me focused.
Anything of value has many, and again, this is easy for me to say as an English professor and a writer. It's like, write your drafts, third draft, fourth draft, you get to the final draft. But the more iterations, the more, and as an entrepreneur, I've learned this as well. And a lot of times everybody likes to think everything's like a overnight success, right? Or, it just happens. And I was reading something recently about, like, especially studying artists, that, the one thing that nobody talks about, that when you study the super successful artists, that the one thing that they all have in common was volume of work. Like when you look at Picasso, for example, everybody's like, oh, he's amazing. You go to a museum and you can see all of these Picassos, yeah? But what you're not seeing is that for every single Picasso hanging on a wall, there's literally thousands on a piece of paper, or that didn't get sold, or that, just were scrapped and everything else. And nobody really focuses on that. And it's just down the line of all of these artists that they would just churn out work over and over and over. And then someone was sharing a quote just recently. I can probably find this clip because I actually watched it. There was an interview. Stephen King and George R.R. Martin were speaking. And George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones. He doesn't just write novels. He creates universes, right? And of course, Stephen King, I don't know how many novels he's written. They were talking about their writing process. And it came up where somebody asked George R.R. like, he said, we write every day and all this. And there's something to the effect of like, well, what's it like when, a day that you take off or that you don't write? And George R.R. Martin just goes, what? He goes, I don't understand the question. And it was just like the thought of spending a day without putting pen to paper was so foreign to him. And that just sparked me that, that's what it's about. Everybody looks at, they only see what's on the shelves. But the true artist or the true creator, and we are all creators, we're all artists, right? They're constantly working on their craft. They're constantly putting something out there. So,
a tiny bit a day is a big, helps in the long run to write that novel or to really move that message forward. I thought it was interesting too. I just saw a video of how in the chapel, one of the chapels in Florence, and I've been there, but I can't remember the name of it. My husband would know right off the top of his head. But down in that chapel, they actually underneath have found Michelangelo's, a lot of his drawings. So in this chapel underneath in the kind of the basement, you can actually see a lot of Michelangelo's sketches, and they're actually thinking of going in and opening it up to the public so you can go down there and see. But there's literally thousands of drawings of just like, how to draw an arm or how to draw, or, there's portions of like the statue David that have been driven or drawn out, but you can see the process that he went through. It wasn't just, he was a great masterful painter, artist. He actually, it takes time to develop that craft. That's awesome. Sorry, that's a whole nother topic. We could spend a whole nother time.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I want to hear more about your website though, and your message, and maybe 3 points that you feel like you want our audience to understand about that message.
Yeah. So the book is just the book of what if, and the website I'm directing people now to is beluga.org. And that's where a lot of the work that I've been doing in person is now having a digital life. So as far as the overall message is really, and this is where we kind of come together, both the work I'm doing with Curiosity and What If, curiosity-based learning, and Beluga, is the overall message is this, if there are 3 points, it's, stay curious, stay curious, stay curious. But we can do more than that, right? So one of the things that I love working with Beluga is it's just 100% free digital platform. So there's no cost. There's no, we're not selling anything. The goal is to connect classrooms. And we do work with not just traditional classrooms, but homeschooling networks, right? We just have to know it's a closed platform just for educators and students. So it's a safe environment. But it just connects classrooms from anywhere in the world together so that they can learn about the world with the world. And, of course, that learning is driven by curiosity. So we work to not even, I would like to say spark that curiosity, but it's already existing, right? So we like to pull that curiosity together and then point it in positive directions. So once we can get classrooms and students, educators who are curious, we can pull them together through the question asking process and connecting their classrooms so that they're actually learning about, science, math, history, the things that, we, have to learn, but through the context of culture and experiences that are different than where they are, or what they know. So I guess the other advice is for people not in a classroom to just, take that approach. Like I mentioned before, I'm down here in Mexico City, and this is my first time in Mexico, and I can never stress the importance of travel. And I think to me, travel and curiosity are just kind of like left foot, right foot in a lot of ways. And you don't just have to travel far, right? You can travel in your own community. You can travel in your own state, your own city, wherever. But just being able to travel with this curious mindset. So I think that's where most of my learning, has come from getting super curious and letting that curiosity push me to new places, either physically or mentally.
Well, and with travel too, like sometimes when we live someplace for a long set of time, we start to get very habitual. We go to the same places and we do the same things. And when you're traveling, your senses, when you live in someplace permanently and you're in this habitual habit, your senses become deadened because you already know what this smells like, or you already know, but when you travel, all of a sudden, all your senses are completely and utterly awake because you're out of that habitual range for sure. So
exactly.
And I kind of wondered, we talk about curiosity and how important that is, but I kind of wonder if people struggle. One of the other common struggles that maybe people have is really being honest about what they're curious about. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've found that with my own kids, like they don't sometimes want to tell me or to be truly honest about what they're curious about because it might, I don't know, they might not like the way that people perceive their curiosity. Does that make sense to you or?
Certainly. And in fact, oh, wow, there's a lot of thoughts running through my head out of everything you're just saying there. I'll see if I'm going to answer the first one and see if I even go on some of the others. But spot on with, there can be a fear to be, curious. And that's one of the reasons I like framing things through what if. Because what if, at least from my the point that I approach it is it creates a third space of questioning. So that when you ask what if, it's not really you, right? Does that, so yeah, you're not saying I think, or I believe, or I want to know. We personalize so much, right? And this is a really interesting statement you made, because I usually think of the third space in terms of giving advice
to yourself,
instead of saying, or to other people in a lot of ways. Like when somebody says, you know what, even if they're right, if they say, you know what, you should exercise, or you should diet, or why don't you do this, or why don't you do that, right? They could be 100% correct. But by saying I think, or you should, the person on the other side has a built-in excuse to ignore the advice because they don't like that person, or but
the
I don't
message
trust
is
that
not
person.
Received, right? I mean, they're feeling
Exactly.
Maybe I don't know how to word it, but they're maybe feeling like they're being pushed or forced to, type of thing. Yeah, exactly.
And when you say what if, nobody owns it. It's like even if you're the person giving the suggestion, if you say, what if you do this, and they end up not doing it, it's not as personal. It's not like, it's because what if exists beyond the people involved. So what you're saying about that danger of getting curious, if you just say, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? There's still a little bit of a distance that can make it safe, or at least feel safe to explore ideas and thoughts that you may not be quite as certain about.
Yeah. I love that. So, and do you want to give us an idea? I got on Beluga, but it definitely, like you said, it's definitely a very closed group. You actually have to sign up for it. Tell me what you would find as soon as you signed up for it. Does it have different classrooms? How does it look?
Yeah. So it's going to sound cliched saying it this way, but really the best way to describe it, from my opinion, is like if Facebook and Skype had a baby, it would be that, right? So what you can do on it is, as an educator, you get a news feed, right, where you get posts both from Beluga but other educators that can be any form of media, right? It could be written, it could be video, it could be pictures about lessons, activities, things that they're doing in their classrooms. It can also be like, here's the national anthem, or here's a picture of our food. So on one level, it's becoming a social network for educators to connect with each other, to share good ideas, learn new lessons, and just celebrate each other, right? And then the students can go on a news feed, and when they see, say, the students in Ghana posting their national anthem, the students can then sing their national anthem or take a picture of their flag and put it kind of like a comment box in Facebook. And then the other part is the students, once their class is registered, they get registration codes, so they develop personal profiles. And these profiles aren't just like, what's your favorite color or anything. They're questions to dig deep into who they are as a person and as a culture. And then once they answer their profile questions, they're able to connect with other students their age in different parts of the world. So kind of like a digital pen pal.
Oh, cool.
And from there, they can connect in class or out of class to continue learning about each other. The Skype part comes in that there's a video tool so that educators can speak to each other directly when designing lesson plans or activities, but also they can Skype classes together. So we just had a class in Macedonia singing their national anthem for a class in Nigeria who then got up and sang their national anthem. We can do this all live via video right there in the classroom. But what gets me super excited, so that's all the kind of the tech side, but as one of my mentors said, is technology is never it. There's always got to be something else, right? So Beluga does something called impact campaigns, where the entire system is gamified. So every interaction a student does, they get points for their classroom. And then if their class would like to, they can start what's called an impact campaign, where their class says, you know what, we need this. And this has been anything from tablets to laptops to soccer balls. So I think a school in Afghanistan wanted an archery set, right? And a school in Ghana needed cement to build a library. So whatever it is that their school needs, they make a campaign around it. And then Beluga assigns a point value to it. And once they get enough points, Beluga will send them that thing.
Oh,
and
wow.
during the early beta test, this is where we get all goosebumpy, is during the beta test, a school in the United States said, you know what? There's some private school up in New York, and they're like, we kind of have everything we need. Could we donate our points to this class in Kenya where, we have friends now? And Beluga's like, you know
awesome.
what a wonderful idea. So now there's a sharing or a donating point system so that we'll have students collaborating together to not only, it's just like it's hitting all these things, right? They're learning about the world with the world. They're still doing science, math, and everything they have to make their administrators happy. But they're also forming relationships with other people and cultures around the world, working together to give them things. But one of the things that really makes me smile is they're also learning that aid isn't just about money, right? So many options now. It's like, all right, let's help out this country. Let's have a fundraiser and raise a bunch of money and send it to them, right? That we're able to start at a very young age, getting young people to realize that resources aren't, it's not just money, that they can have an impact on the world and other people just by doing their homework, right?
That's really awesome.
Just by saying hello. Yeah. So I get really excited about the potential for all this. It's only a 2-year company. I've been working with them for this last year, and just seeing how quickly we can grow and connect the world is just really inspiring.
And you said that a single student can also sign up and be on this platform as well, right? I mean,
yes.
We're talking about self-directed students and all of that too.
Oh, that's one of the other wonderful things about it. So a student can go outside, like after school while they're home, and just hop on and do stuff. And then the teacher has control, and she can see how active the students are. So anything that the student does, that her teacher can still be aware of, right? Mm-hmm. But also we're finding these new opportunities where there's a student in a rural part of the country who was very interested in robotics, and they didn't have those classes. But because on Beluga, they were able to connect the student, and I think it was Hong Kong, they were able to now connect the students so that the student, and I think it was rural Missouri, is taking lessons or getting access to classes on robotics in Hong Kong.
Wow. I'm going to have to look more into this, because that's a whole nother, I mean, like I said, a whole nother podcast of opportunity. That's awesome. So great.
Just before I forget, because that is on my notes, and I know your email is about referrals and stuff. One of the people I would like to refer is the founder of Beluga. His name's Evan Schwartz, and I know he'd be more than happy not only to speak with you, but also to learn from you what would be some great ways that Beluga could get more integrated with the homeschooling and, say, non-traditional kind of communities out there.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I definitely, after we're done recording, I definitely want to get that from you, because I'd love to hear more and be able to connect my audience to it for sure. So, but I just wanted to know if we have covered all the bases with the Book of What If and your message before we move on to some of our final questions. Is there anything more you want to say about that, or do you feel like it's been?
No, I think we've got it pretty well. We got it pretty well covered.
Awesome.
Okay. Oh, I will just say one before I forget, because you mentioned something before about travel and getting lost and stuff. It did remind me of one of the questions in the Book of What If, is what if there was no luck? And I always, just personally, always think it's dangerous just for people to just rely on luck, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's got to be a better way. But people have actually studied luck, and we can scientifically prove that luck doesn't exist. But we can also, when you look into it, you can also find ways to at least generate more luck or the appearance of luck in your life. And one of the things that the studies show is taking different routes to work or the growth. You were talking about this earlier, and that just kind of triggered that thought about even in your own town or your daily routine, finding new or taking different ways to get there, because it'll force you to come across new things, which will trigger new ideas, and they'll make it feel like you're lucky. But it's really just a matter of traveling in different routes. So
I love that. Yeah. We recently moved just across town, and we've noticed that, like, things that we've lived in this town for, 2 decades or something, and things that we didn't even know, just because we moved and now we're taking different routes, all of a sudden we're seeing our own little tiny world a lot differently. So that's awesome. A great concept to think about. Well, and I want to hear about, we talked about how to keep that curiosity, ask those questions, but what other habits do you feel like in your personal life would help make you successful?
Wow, that's a great one. I may have covered, I was trying to think, asking questions, traveling. I do a lot of writing, and not even writing to share, but I usually have a moleskin, like just a little notebook with me, and just having that, again, not even necessarily a personal diary with deep, dark secrets, but just having something kind of that. You were talking before about that tactile thing about, pulling an encyclopedia off the shelves, just having pen on paper, just being able to write down thoughts, not with no pressure of like, no, I've got to remember this later, but just being able to, it helps you kind of like be in the moment, I think, because life can get so chaotic and everything, and just kind of have a pen and paper. It could be a buck slip. It could be a notebook, a moleskin, however fancy you want to get. Just have access to something like that around you at all times, so that when ideas do come up, you can sketch them down or write them down. I think that helps us refine ideas and, keep track of them.
Yeah. And ideas come at the weirdest times, usually when you're out and you don't have a pen and paper, or, pen and paper. So if you have that always with you, then you're always going to be prepared. So that's awesome. I want to hear maybe long-term things that you plan on to do and how you feel like that's working into the legacy that you hope to leave.
Wow, that's, long term, I always tell people my dream is someday to become rich enough that I can get back into the classroom. But until then, I always want to, long term is just finding new ways to stay as connected as possible to students and educators. And again, I'm going to keep going back to you bringing up the homeschooling network, right? It's not just as many different kinds of educators and students, globally, but also domestically, just to keep that relationship. It'd be very easy for somebody in my position right now, I think, to just completely get farther and farther away from the classroom and the actual kind of like educational settings, and just to make sure that connection is always rich and always being nurtured.
Yeah.
Stuff like this podcast.
Yeah. Well, I kind of worry about that with myself, like I do a lot of educational philosophy of like, oh, well, this would be a better way and stuff, but to actually use it in an applicable way, I never know, because it's all philosophy. So definitely keeping it relevant by staying in the community helps a lot. So do you have any maybe final parting words for our listeners and how we can connect with you? Did we finish the legacy?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm legacy. It's like, I always feel like I've never really given it any thought. I guess as an educator, I always look at like my legacy is my students, right? So it's whatever they're doing. That's kind of like the benchmarks for my life is what they're up to, what they're doing, and what they're accomplishing. So that's kind of where I always look. But as far as advice, again, this is everybody's gonna get sick of it. Stay curious, right? Keep finding new ways to be curious. Aside from that, like, get in touch with me. I'm very happy to be in touch with anybody. Like I said, I rarely say no to anything, which I've drives me crazy, but also I think pushes me forward. I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. Matt Murrie, Murrie. Most of my work in communication is on Facebook or Twitter. And if people want to connect with me there, I'm more than happy to connect with them, their educational communities, whomever, to find ways to seek collaboration and really just push forward that ultimate goal of making sure education is what it is, what the future deserves.
That's awesome. Well, what a great podcast. I think we went off on some fun little tangents, but definitely some great food for thought. But again, we've been chatting with Matt Murrie. He's the author of the book of What If. You can find him on beluga.org, or I'm going to be sure to connect the information that we've discussed today on our website as well. But thank you so much, Matt, for joining us and helping to light our minds on fire on this important topic of education. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Matt Murrie, go to our show notes at luminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and help us to continue production of illuminating content by sponsoring us at patreon.com/theluminousmind to get exclusive content. Subscribe on YouTube, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.